Welcome back to the Biblical Justice Resources Podcast. What is the role of the local church in pursuing biblical justice? When I was looking for a new church home coming out of COVID restrictions, I wanted to find a church that was both asking and working to respond to this question. What I found at Sanctuary Covenant Church on Minneapolis' north side is a church that is seeking to do just that. We've already heard from some Sanctuary connections who've helped us think about the Bible, ministry, and racial justice here on the podcast. But today we're going to hear more about some practical examples of pursuing justice that the church is taking from our guest, Andrea Lee. Andrea's official title is the Executive Director of Operations for Sanctuary Covenant Church. As part of her role, Andrea also leads Sanctuary's neighboring ministry, a ministry which helps the church and its congregants understand how to be a neighbor within and among the North Minneapolis community. Through a food pantry, school partnerships, learning sessions and experiences on issues affecting the neighborhood, practical advocacy, and more, Andrea is leading a ministry which seeks to practically respond to a biblical call to pursue justice. Through this conversation, you'll hear more about each of these examples. You'll learn more about what it looks like to discern topical direction and find partners already doing the work. And you'll think more about understanding the place where charity and justice intersect. Now, if you will, join me for this conversation with Andrea Lee. My name's Eric, and this is the Biblical Justice Resources Podcast. Our conversation will begin right after this. The Biblical Justice Resources Podcast is supported by listeners like you at patreon.com/biblicaljusticeresources. If you're interested in supporting the podcast and helping to resource individuals and the church for the pursuit of biblical justice, please consider giving today at patreon.com/biblicaljusticeresources. Again, visit patreon.com/biblicaljusticeresources to help support the podcast. Now on with the show. Andrea, thank you for joining me here today on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
You are, I'm now forgetting off the top of my head, but like the 7th or 8th Sanctuary connection now who I've had on the podcast. So hopefully that says something good about Sanctuary and what the church is doing here as it pertains to justice.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. So we're here today to talk kind of about the neighboring ministry at Sanctuary and some of the things like the active, practical things that the church, the congregation, and that group of people is doing when it comes to doing and pursuing justice. So just kind of broadly, can you lay out what the neighboring ministry looks like and what are the different aspects of that?
Sure. So I'd love to give just a little background first with neighboring and Sanctuary. I am the director of operations and neighboring at Sanctuary. And I came to the neighboring side of things unexpectedly in some ways. I was a director of operations for about 7 years before I started. I got into the second half of my role, which is the neighboring side of the role. In fact, for the first number of years that I worked for the Sanctuary, I really saw my role as behind the scenes. I paid the bills, I did the payroll, I helped everything run event-wise and just with the facility and so many things like that. But I didn't have a very community-focused or forward-facing role. And then I'll never forget this one very important conversation I had with a coworker at the Sanctuary. One day we were out for a walk, and so many people from the neighborhood knew her by name. And so they would stop us, we would chat for a few moments, and then we'd continue on our way. And I just remember being so struck by the fact that she was well known in the neighborhood. And I thought to myself, I know very few people that otherwise don't go to church, but live in the neighborhood. I didn't know anybody in the community other than through like community organizations or things like that. And I felt that this was definitely a wrong turn somewhere in my life. And that was very convicting to me. And a few years later, COVID occurred and the racial reckoning and George Floyd's murder and all of those kinds of things. And the sanctuary began ramping up its ministry in the neighborhood. So we did food distributions and we did like the COVID vaccine clinics and many other things, resources and things for the neighborhood. And and then suddenly the desire was for us to potentially hire a full-time neighboring person, which we did. But unfortunately, this person did not end up working out. And the neighboring responsibilities fell back towards my role. And so, because I had done so much in organizing the logistics of the food, distributions and also the vaccine clinics and, doing like gift giveaways in December and many other acts of charity rather than justice per se in the neighborhood. I thought, well, and leadership thought maybe my role could hold that position until the next candidate comes along. But I came to really realize that I felt a great sense of calling the longer I've been in the neighboring ministry as part of my role. And I've loved it, and I have felt deeply called to it. But that's to say that I do believe I am still just holding the position for a time. And then I do believe that there is someone potentially that has a stronger and deeper connection to North Minneapolis than I do, even that will someday take over my role and be able to take it even to the next level. And so my goal is to really build a firm foundation, which I believe I have been doing over the last, 5 years or so. But then someday this position will go to someone perhaps that has grown up in North Minneapolis, someone that lives in North Minneapolis, someone who is Black, potentially. There's a lot of different ways that the position could go, but I do feel that that might be the next level of things in neighboring for the sanctuary. Um, I guess I should
Yeah,
come up for air.
for sure. Yeah, I we can come to some of that stuff with the actual neighborhood and some of the broader stuff, but I'm interested in your response sort of personally that you had that you felt this conviction about feeling a need to be more connected to people in the neighborhood, to the neighborhood itself. And I'm curious about that because in some ways I have been there and in some ways I'm still personally there, and I can imagine other people who are like, I see things going on around me and want to be more connected. I'm curious about what the drive of that is. What feels so important about building those connections after having, I mean, internally you felt that, but
Hmm.
from coming from seeing your coworker be connected
Hmm.
in that way, what all are sort of the things that drive you into feeling like that's an important piece of being part of this community?
Well, I mean, I do really believe that God calls us to be a neighbor to others, to love our neighbors as ourselves. And how can you do that if you don't know anyone personally? I do believe neighboring is kind of two-pronged. There are micro ways to neighbor, which are individual relationships that we build with people and people that God brings into our life that we can, help, or they might be there to help us in many ways. Or there's the macro level of neighboring, which is, how can the sanctuary be a neighbor in the community, in the larger North Minneapolis community, or even the city of Minneapolis or our state or whatever it might be, and what ways can we leverage our position and maybe unique voice to bring about change for our neighbors. So there's kind of those two parts, and I think we can't ignore either one. And so when my coworker and I felt that sense of conviction that I should be a neighbor and be known as a neighbor in the neighborhood, that, was something I took very seriously. And so I really did think, what would be ways that I could change that? And one very simple way that I started to do something that I did that helped me change that was I started walking the neighborhood. So it's a very simple thing, but if you get in your car and you go to work and you go to home and you never interact with any people in between those 2 points, so much of our life is lost. So part of it was getting outside and meeting neighbors. So, for me, anytime I have to do minor business in North Minneapolis, I walk there. So I have to make some keys for the facility. I walk to Dave's Lock and Key down, a couple blocks. I have to buy something at Cub Foods. I walk over to Cub Foods and I buy the stuff. I, also, one of the big prongs of the neighboring ministry is our partnership with three Northside schools, Hall STEM Academy, Franklin Middle School, and North High. And so anytime I have to go to Hall or Franklin, I walk across the street and go to those two schools. I don't rely on my vehicle as much as possible unless I have to transport something. And on the way, any person I meet, I always greet, in a friendly manner. I always say hello or good morning or whatever it might be, because sometimes people stop me and we chat, and sometimes they don't say anything, but it doesn't matter because I think part of the first thing to do is to be friendly. People then often will recognize me in the neighborhood, in other settings. So if they come to the Haven Pantry, they may recognize me from doing little errands around town. Or if at some point they come to our church service, sometimes they recognize me. And I think that's part of it, is just being a friendly face in the neighborhood, or someone that sees people for their humanity and greets them in, our world where often we just don't have time for one another.
Yeah, those are such good practical steps. And it's such a great observation at the end that there are times where we don't feel like we have time, but some of that is how we have structured the way we live and just operate in the world. And so I like that idea of like these are ways of being able to take time to have those human connections in the neighborhood.
That's right. I'll give you just one small example. Yesterday, I had to drop something off at Hall, and so I walked across and went to Hall, did my thing, and then on my way back, I ran into a woman who I just greeted, and she stopped me, and we had this, fairly lengthy conversation, and she just wanted to tell me some things about her day, and I did she recognize me from the church or the pantry? I'm not sure. But it was just, if I had been in my vehicle, we never would have had a chance to connect in that way. And I wouldn't have been able to hear about her day. So she happened to be an elderly lady. And so I know, like, people are so lonely out there, not just obviously in North Minneapolis, but everywhere. And I think part of we have to be available. We have to find ways to be available to each other and especially to our neighbors if we hope to share something as deep as our faith with them.
Yeah, those are such great observations. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the neighborhood itself, just what you, both what you see and observe, and kind of how the neighborhood itself is perceived. Because we've talked a little bit about North Minneapolis on the podcast, but I'm not under the assumption that everyone who listens is from Minnesota. I think we kind of have a broad audience in that way.
Sure,
So, yeah, just what is it? What is the neighborhood like, and why did Sanctuary become planted where it is so intentionally?
sure. Yeah, I mean, North Minneapolis is a beautiful, diverse, um, just wonderful place that has a long history. It has both a history of strength and resilience. It also has a history of structural racism, environmental racism, a lot of other things that have caused it to struggle in certain ways. I mean, I believe that every community has its struggles, certainly. But I have never really been a part of a community that is as resilient and has people that truly care about one another the way North has. Now, I will say that North is often portrayed in the media, and also the perception may be from people who do not live in the community or who do not know much about North Minneapolis to be like a crime-ridden like place where it's not safe to go. It's somewhere where they would never go. And I really like to challenge those perceptions. I mean, I think there's been historic disinvestment in North Minneapolis. And so is the North Minneapolis commercial corridor as strong as in many other places? It is not, because it has been shafted in many ways historically over the years. But it is certainly, I believe, filled with people, many people who do care about their neighbors, who care about the conditions of the city, who want to have an affordable place to live. They want jobs. They want good education for their kids. All of those kinds of things are true about North Minneapolis.
Yeah. And it strikes me that most, if not all, of the things you just mentioned are things that we have discussed through neighboring ministry events within the last year or so, from the environmental side of things to the business corridor side of things with the North Side Forward plan and a lot of the other things you touched on. So it does seem in some way like the neighboring ministry is connecting to the concerns of the neighborhood and trying to drive understanding and drive action in those things as well. So I appreciate that as someone who's attending the church and who lives on the north side.
Yes, I mean, as the few things that you just mentioned there, part of, I think, our role in the neighboring ministry is to help educate and activate people in these areas. So, for example, we may not be able to take on every issue to a deep degree. Like, for instance, we only dipped one toe into environmental justice last year when we did a environmental justice tour of the North Side and some of the different businesses over the years who have historically abused North Minneapolis, and some of the terrible environmental damage that has been done to the riverfront as well as other places in North, which of course have been health detriments to health in North Minneapolis, like much higher instances of asthma and other cancers and other things around certain areas, especially with some of the metal processing. And those are things that we want our congregation members to know about, and therefore to dig in deeper if they have that calling. The church necessarily can't champion every aspect of everything all at once, but we
Yeah.
certainly can learn about things slowly, and then where God is really calling us to dig in, and entrench deeply. I think that's where we have to all get behind the bus and push.
Yeah. So I wonder then what the discernment process is like for deciding what issues are we focusing on now? How much time are we taking to learn about other issues before we bring it in front of people? What does that sort of a process look like?
Yes, I think part of it is I mean, certainly there are things that rise to the surface that are to me, very clear that God has spoken for the sanctuary to be deeply involved in. So, for example, our very, how should I put it? Uh, our very disappointing, disheartening struggle to evict TXT / Merwin Liquors from the corner of Lindale and Broadway. Now, that was a something that I believe the Lord did call us to be a part of, and it was very clear that we should, even though the outcome was not as we had hoped. And so to give you the short version for your listeners who might not know of this situation, the church is at just one block from probably one of the historically most violent corners in the city. So our church is on one corner, and then there's we have our resource center, which is a secondary building next to the church, which houses our office and a syringe exchange, and our food pantry. And so those are the main things that are in that building. And that building is a commercial duplex with TXT/Merwin Liquors. And for decades, that parking lot of the liquor store, as well as the corner and the gas station that is across from the liquor store, have been nuisance businesses in which there have been countless shootings, open prostitution, drug sales, everything you can imagine used to happen in our parking lot. It all came to a head after George Floyd's murder, when community violence and violence at the corner really surged after the summer of 2020. So 2020, 2021, 2022 were the very worst on record, where we were having shootings almost every day. And at that time, we tried our best to purchase the liquor store. We were actually under purchase agreement with them, but one of the contingencies was that they would find another location in the city to relocate. And due to many things, they just could not find a place in the city which was also zoned as a liquor store to be able to relocate. And so things kept getting worse and worse and worse until the church finally gave up on purchasing the liquor store and basically opened a case with the attorney general to get them evicted or get their business license revoked, and all of those things to get them to really be responsible for what was happening at the corner. And through a long series of things, they were able to continue operating. They ended up selling the original owners who owned the property and the business. They sold the business to another group who then did have an influence, as well as the church and other organizations, the police. There was a lot of different factors, but the short story is that the violence on the corner did decrease dramatically. Like, I would say in the last probably 3 years, we've had less than 10 shootings overall. The number of 911 calls in 1 year used to be like 300 a year, and they're down to under 20 per year. Wow. So it's incredible. It's amazing. Now, did God do it the way I thought he should have done it? No, which is and someday when I go to heaven and talk to God, I will ask him directly. My first or second question will be, why didn't we get the liquor store so we could redevelop the block and we could, have had just a place of redemption versus still having a liquor store in that spot? However, community violence, the neighborhood did change after that whole long process of the attorney general being involved, etc. It did change the neighborhood for the better. And so I am eternally grateful for that, and that our community can, at least in this one area, feel like things did get cleaned up. And now that's not to say that we don't have a responsibility for many other places to continue this work. And I think that that's the case, but at least this particular area did get cleaned up. And, I believe God was calling us to be a part of all of that, because we were able to deeply engage with our neighbors. We were able to help them get in front of the right people in government and leadership to hear their concerns. And we all worked together as a community to make change.
Yeah, it has been such a great example to watch, in some cases to walk alongside, as that has been happening. And to see what has happened. And it's so interesting for you to say, or for you to talk about, it's not the way that you would have wanted God to take care of it. I think there are a lot of people at the church who feel that way,
Mhm.
but I guess this is where we are hoping that God has more in store that we just are not aware of, that brings that sort of redemptive place to it. But as you said, that built relationships that maybe otherwise wouldn't have been, and it did bring some level of change to that place and to the community.
It did. And, Pastor Edrin, our senior pastor, he really firmly believes that someday we will get that liquor store, which I do pray for all the time that somehow that liquor store could be closed down someday. Even if the church doesn't end up purchasing it, for example, if it could just be closed down, because I do believe um, just the amount of pain that liquor store has caused over many decades, that to me, it would be justice for the community if it could be closed down.
Yeah. Another thing that you talked about that shares the building with that is the Haven Food Pantry. And if you could talk a little about the beginnings of that, because I felt like I started attending Sanctuary in 2021, I believe, right after it came back from COVID, the COVID restrictions, and it felt like in some ways it was getting off the ground at that point. But
Yes.
I am sort of outside of the scope of knowing how that actually works. So what did that beginnings look like, and what does it look like now?
Sure. Yes. So again, part of it is being open to partnering with other people who are already doing the work. And so there is a career force development center that is right across the street from the sanctuary. And I had met this woman who was over there and who had a heart for doing food ministry. And so every fourth Thursday, she would have like a food distribution in her building and in her parking lot. Actually, it was only in her building at that time. And this was probably 2018, 19, right in there, 18 and 19. And so before COVID. And she invited us to help provide sanctuary volunteers to go and help with the distribution that would happen. And so I would sometimes be able to gather some volunteers and go over there. And then COVID happened, and her building said, we are not going to allow any more food distributions from our building right now because we just don't think it's safe to have anybody come in indoors to do that. And so she turned to us and said, could you help with this? And so this is now 2020. And or no, I think it was like somewhere in there. And so we started having food distributions in our parking lot at first, and just one Thursday a month, just a slow kind of thing. And then after George Floyd was murdered, the strangest thing or the most interesting thing started happening. We got some calls right after his murder where people were saying, from the suburbs or just even strangers that we don't even know, were calling the church and saying, I have like some supplies like diapers and food, canned food, and things like that. Would the church like them for residents? And we said, sure, yeah, we'll take them. And suddenly, it was like an avalanche of support for families in North Minneapolis. After George Floyd was murdered, like so many things started happening. There was a lot of community unrest in South Minneapolis. But what some people who are in Minnesota don't know is that a lot of North Minneapolis was in turmoil as well. And so the commercial corridor of Broadway, almost every retail store was broken into and smashed. Um, Now, that's another testament, I believe, to God's provision and also how sanctuary is perceived by the neighborhood because our church is wall to wall glass. Like we have windows just going all the way around our entire building, and we did not board up. We did we didn't do any of that, and no part of our building was touched. And so we started distributing all of that, all of those things, and did so throughout the 2020 and 2021. And then finally in the winter of November of 2021, we decided to have a permanent space and open the Haven Pantry. And so that's in our secondary building, which is next to the church. It was a dance studio, but during COVID, of course, that got closed down. So we thought God really was calling us to use the space in a way that could serve the community. And so the Haven Pantry was born at that point. And so we are open twice a week, and we serve over 200 families a week. And the interesting shift there has been at first, probably the majority of the families that we served were Black families, some Hmong families, and some white families. But in the last year and a half, our demographics have shifted to the point where now we are serving probably 50% Spanish speaking Central American families, immigrant families that have settled into North. And so that, of course, gave us like a front row seat and a way to minister during the immigration enforcement crisis, where with Operation Metro Surge and all of the terrible things that happened to many immigrant families in our community, we then were perfectly positioned to be able to do food deliveries to families that were, of course, before that, just coming to the Haven Pantry directly to shop.
Yeah. I I think we're maybe all continuing to lament the number of crises that we have experienced in Minneapolis. And so
Yes.
it's like each of our stories, people who are from Minneapolis and Minnesota, it's like continues to touch on each of those things. And I I think we are hoping for some sort of calm at some point to to
Yes.
last for longer than a couple of years. But I'm curious. We've talked a bunch on here about what happened during the ice presence and things of that nature. So I'm not. I don't think we're going to go down that road here. But I'm curious if you've seen a difference post surge. So there are still agents in the city in some capacity. There are still actions happening in some capacity. What are you seeing from the community in North Minneapolis or the community coming up to the Haven Pantry in terms of how they perceive what is continuing to happen?
Yes. So we have definitely had pantry guests that have talked about family members even being recently taken by ICE. But it is definitely to a much less degree than what we were seeing during Metro Surge. And also, these families are willing to emerge from their homes. So during Metro Surge, they strictly lock themselves down for the most part. But now people have mostly returned to work and their kids have come back to school. In fact, in speaking to many of those families, they said they were going to hold them until after spring break and then allow their kids to go back to school. And so, though at least that has been hopeful.
Yeah.
It is not over fully, but it is much less of a threat, at least that these families are, when weighing how they're going to make a living and how they're going to survive with what they feel is the risk, it is a risk that most families are willing to take.
Yeah. And I think one of the things now that is being discussed is that a lot of the networks that were built during this most recent crisis now are things that need to continue into the future. And so even if like immigration action ended tomorrow in the way that it currently exists, like the ongoing work of those network connections and continuing to be a neighbor to everyone in the community, I think it seems like the neighboring ministry is positioned to be in a good place to continue to help with those things. and maybe can help be a model for other places.
Yes, I mean, some of the things that have changed since the enforcement, we've helped build up our ability to do pastoral care visits for people that are shut in, immigrant families that are shut in, as well as we've built up volunteers that are bilingual. One of the things, of course, that we are still seeing as a major issue is I think financially, a lot of these families obviously are still really struggling because they may be behind in 1 to 2 to 3 months rent. And so they're really trying to get out from behind potentially being evicted. And so, a lot of it is community navigation for families. So, when I get, asked for sanctuaries assistance with rental payments or overdue utilities, things like that, I will help the family. But as long as they are a family that lives in North Minneapolis, that's one of our criterion. But then I will also send the family other resources of ways that they can hopefully get these financial obligations taken care of without further harm.
Yeah, that's a good thing that I think we can sometimes miss is that we've already talked a little bit about it, but that other people are doing work. And I
Oh,
think at
yes.
times people feel like, oh, there is a need in the community. I will start doing a thing without necessarily looking to see if other people are doing the work. Do you have any either examples of how Sanctuary has found other people doing the work or ways that people who are listening could find some of those like ways to keep their ears open or what sort of processes you've seen work in terms of finding other people who are doing work like this?
Right. I mean, part of it is being intentional about the relationships you develop. So, I think Pastor Edrin just incorporated something in one of his recent sermons that was, make friends before you need them. So true. Because, it's hard to build up friends in a crisis. But when you already have relationships and friendships built up between organizations or individual relationships, that's crucial. It's key. And so, one of the things, as we have noticed before the Operation Metro Surge, when we were noticing the great number and the shift towards Spanish-speaking families coming to the pantry, we looked around to see what local Spanish-speaking churches were around that we could help connect folks to. So, you know, one thing that we realize is even though, obviously our work at the pantry is meant to be in many ways a way to point towards our faith and then point people towards the church, right next door. Obviously, if half the people coming to the pantry don't speak English, they are not going to be able to really come to our services. And so, since that is the case, and the sanctuary's mission and vision is specifically for, English speakers who are, because we are a Black-led, multi-ethnic congregation, and English speaking, that is not going to change. I would foresee that we will never, I can't say never, but probably very unlikely that we would have bilingual services. Then we should engage partners who are doing that work in the neighborhood and help connect people there. And so that's why we have made some connections to um, some local Spanish speaking churches, and those pastors join with us and are then also able to help us to know about other organizations that are supporting families that have been affected in these ways, and then we can kind of compile, resources for people and send them out.
Yeah. I want to transition a little bit to talk about another entity, and that's Love Minneapolis. So we haven't touched on anything of that yet, but Love Minneapolis, from my understanding, is sort of the like a nonprofit arm of Sanctuary almost, or like a nonprofit partner that came out of Sanctuary. Can you talk a little bit more about Love Minneapolis and how that functions, what that looks like, what it does in the community?
Sure. Well, Love Minneapolis had its start in many ways with the old Sanctuary CDC, which was a community development corporation that was the nonprofit, non-religious arm of the sanctuary. And it, I believe, was started very close to the beginning of the church by our former founding pastor. And he really had a belief that there was a need for both, and especially since a lot of corporations or other organizations that maybe are non-religious that do want to be involved with the good work being done in the community. He thought that there should be a way for them to do that easily by having a nonprofit. And so the CDC, probably about maybe eight to 10 years after the church was established, that CDC did end up becoming a different organization. And so for many different reasons did that happen. But then in the summer of 2020, when after George Floyd, the same sort of things started coming up where companies or corporations that were local to us, they wanted ways to be able to donate money or other things to the sanctuary, but couldn't do it to a church. And so we established Love Minneapolis. And the goal was to hire an executive director eventually that would lead the work. It would be youth initiatives and other things, and do sort of community facing work alongside Sanctuary, but perhaps in different realm than Sanctuary would be able to go as a church. And so just last year did we hire our first executive director in Lanisha Walker. And she's an amazing person. She's young, she's Black, she has a history with North Minneapolis and with Minneapolis in general. And so she has been a great fit. She is working on many different things, and just to get Love Minneapolis, off the ground. And I'm really excited for how her leadership might, influence the path of Love Minneapolis.
Yeah,
Maybe she'll be your next guest.
perhaps at some point. Apparently, I'm just going through Sanctuary's staff, so
Yes.
so it's certainly a possibility. You kind of answered my next question a little bit with that about what the nonprofit can do that the church can't do necessarily. Are there any other things where you see like this works better in the nonprofit setting versus the church setting, or vice versa?
Mhm. Well, I think one of the desires of Love Minneapolis is potentially to be involved in youth enterprise. So whether that might mean, some sort of business in which youth could be trained and to given skills to, eventually get even further jobs beyond the youth enterprise. And so I think that there's a certain level of partnership that a church can do with a school, and then there's the next level potentially that could happen with a nonprofit that is involved with a school. And so I'd like to see, hopefully Love Minneapolis will be able to lean into that, because it's we Sanctuary has the strong partnerships with our three partner schools, but I think there's so much more that could be even expanded.
Yeah, that's cool.
Mhm.
Uh, we're not all the way to the end of our time, but we're getting close. So, kind of think about bringing us to a wrap up here. One of the things that came up when I talked to Pastor Edrin that we didn't expand on was he mentioned that there were some things that didn't work, like some initiatives or programs that didn't work necessarily, but that there were like different things to learn from that. Like, I'm just kind of curious from your perspective, are there things that you've tried that you would say, this didn't work, but we learned a great lesson to then put into a different program or initiative or anything like that?
Hmm. I wonder what he was referring to. I mean,
Yes, it might not be fair to ask you about his feelings, so I won't do that.
well, I mean,
But
I know that there are many things that we have tried and have not worked out as we expected or wanted. I mean, certainly the liquor store was the biggest probably of that. Um, I would say also, you know, it is our intention at Sanctuary. So, for those of you who might not know, we have a large parcel of land in front of the church. It's just an open field at the moment, but someday we would like to develop that parcel of land. Or actually, I should qualify. We do not want to develop it. We want to be involved in its development, but a developer could potentially develop it, and our stake in the project would be the parcel of land. And so someday I would love to see that happen. And I believe that there's hopefully space and time, maybe yet in my career, where that could get underway. Maybe even now that Northside Forward, there are so many like plans and hopes and dreams and money to be able to develop certain parts of North Minneapolis. Maybe even something will come of that in the next 10 years, within the next 10 years. But, I think I don't want us to fall into mistakes of other developments. So I do think that part of it is learning from other people in what has worked, what has not worked, and not try to redevelop the wheel every single time. Like, I know that we will need to be involved in having some affordable housing, for example, in the field. But then we will need to, there are parts of it that we can learn from other developments around town that have also done affordable housing or mixed use housing that maybe, are, I wouldn't say errors, but were challenges for them. And so certainly there are programs and things that we have tried and that have not worked in the past as well. And then there are things, of course, that we can learn from others that are doing similar work.
Yeah, we've mentioned Northside Forward a couple of times here. So for people who are unfamiliar with it, it is essentially going to be like $1.5 billion investment into the North Side over the next decade or so.
Yes.
One of the things that was interesting to me during the meeting we had about it, where the people came and spoke about it, was that money that is coming into the North Side is much more likely to come through nonprofit grant work sort of things than through business. There are banks that are sort of unwilling essentially to invest money into an area that they feel like is not going to bring a return on their investment. I'm curious if you have thoughts about what you would like to see sort of grow in the North Side from a, like, whether a nonprofit and business partnership or like sort of that enterprise that maybe Love Minneapolis is hoping to bring about with youth. Like, what does it look like for development that then sort of like gets the ball rolling to sustain itself and bring change in some sort of way on the North Side?
Right. Yes. I mean, that's like a whole another podcast, I think.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yes. But I mean, certainly, I think there has to be the collective will of a company or a corporation has to have perhaps not obviously for-profit companies are trying to make a profit, but there are just things to be thought of as well. So, for example, Cub Foods. One justice issue that comes to mind with that is after George Floyd and all of those things, and Cub Foods across the street from the church was looted and partially burned, and some other things. It sustained some great damage. Cub Foods was strongly believing that they were going to shut down our Northside Cub, which was one of the only grocery stores in North Minneapolis. Many other communities have like 4 or 5 options of grocery stores. We had 2, Aldi and Cub. And so it would have been a great loss to the community if Cub Foods had been shut down. But there are many other places in the city where Cub Foods is making, obviously a strong profit. North Minneapolis, they said the store often loses money. And so how can a corporation balance that? I believe we have to exert our influence to encourage companies like Cub to do the right thing and keep the Cub in North Minneapolis open, even if it doesn't make a strong profit, because they're making money other places potentially so that they can maybe keep and food access open for a community that really needs it. And so part of part of that is, I think, really important for work for us to do as well. And I would like to continue to see companies encouraging one another to do this sort of work. Just recently, a Wells Fargo opened up down the street from us, which I see as a very positive sign. For many, many years, it was just, US Bank was open down the street from us. And so now there are more options for our community members. The Walgreens shut down, the CVS shut down. There's very few places where you can get your prescription drugs in North Minneapolis. One of them is the Cub Pharmacy. If that Cub had been shut down, again, that would be another avenue of places where people in the community could not get their prescription drugs. So I want to see companies spurring each other on in this work.
Yeah, I agree. Especially as a North Side resident, because we're even in this place now where you mentioned Aldi also pulled out, and
Right,
so we ended up moving to having Cub and then North Market, which is kind of a independent grocery store further north, and now North Market is having problems. But it's like
right,
we've got 60,000 residents or whatever that need food. Like
right.
we need people to step up and be like, as you said, it is the right thing to do. It is the just thing to do to have a presence and pull profits from, if it's a situation where you're pulling profits from other stores to maintain a presence elsewhere where people need food, like people still have money to spend for food on the north side. So
That's right. One thing I will say, if any of your listeners are part of the Cub management, one thing I find extremely troubling, though, is yes, I am very happy that the Cub Foods in on the north side is open, but the prices at the Cub Foods on the north side are significantly higher than if you just go to another suburb that is close by. And to me, that is a unconscionable tax on people who can't afford who can afford to leave the area to be able to get their groceries elsewhere. Those people are able to shop at lower prices than people who perhaps are relying on public transportation or don't have as many options. They're being charged a high surtax. And so
yeah,
that to me is not right. And something I really wish could be changed, that there could be some sort of more standardized pricing across companies so that you're not just charging people who can't already afford it higher prices when they
yeah,
aren't able to shop around.
I agree with that as well. Uh, so with that, I think we're going to come here to our final question, which might end up being leaving the biggest question for last, or one of the biggest questions. But I want to come back to a thought that you brought up about sort of a difference between charity and justice. Like there is work that is charity work, there is work that is justice work. This maybe would have been good to lead off with, but here we are at the end. What do you see as this difference between charity work and justice work? How do they sort of work together, and what are the differences that make them different sorts of things?
I think, this is an interesting question, of course, because, and it's complicated. It isn't so simple. Like you're giving away free stuff, that is charity. It's not just that. I think I have really come to understand sort of a more complicated and complex look at what we do, even through the Haven Pantry. So, the Haven Pantry, as I mentioned, is open that twice a week, and all of our items are for free, and people can come no matter where you live in the city. You could come and shop at the Haven Pantry. Um, and at first, I had a very simplistic view that that was purely charity. And so I kept thinking, being the director of neighboring, we need to continue to have Haven Pantry, but we also need to move beyond Haven Pantry. That was my thought. And I had a really interesting interchange with a Black woman from our church who was she had volunteered to do food deliveries during the Metro Surge. So every Sunday, she would pick up food deliveries for 5 families, and she would drive them to the different homes in North Minneapolis for those people that were not feeling comfortable to leave their homes. And her strong feeling was, this is not charity work. This is justice work. And so her statement, even her simple statement of that, made me think again about the complexity of these issues. That yes, we are giving away free groceries. And is that is that an act of justice or is that an act of charity? The line becomes a bit blurred because I think while potentially some might view Haven Pantry as purely charitable, we are still serving a vulnerable population in a way of pushing back against unjust things that are being done in our community. And by even giving people the opportunity to join us in this work, that is an act of justice. And so during the time of making food deliveries to people who were shut in, one interesting thing I found was that about 25% of our volunteers were not sanctuary members. They were people from our community who had just heard about the work that Sanctuary was doing and wanted to join in and join us. And so to me, by helping people find a way to be involved, we were encouraging them to push back on unjust things being done. And so I would like to continue wrestling with that just internally as the director of neighboring, but also I think it's important for us as a church to figure out what are the ways that God is leading us to be involved in justice issues and in acts of charity. And I think the labels don't always fully line up.
Yeah, it's such it brings me back, one, to the way that justice and righteousness are translated in the Old Testament. Like, righteousness is this idea of coming into right relationship, which is also justice, could be translated as justice. So that like inviting other people into it is an act of justice in that way. So I will affirm in that way. It also makes me think about Henry Nouwen wrote a really small book on fundraising. And one of the things that comes out of that is, in fundraising, you're inviting other people into what is happening. So in that specific instance, through financial participation. But it's like, it is a way to bring other people into the work, into the process. And so all that brought together is this like reminder of the way that coming into right relationship with other people is as connected as coming into right relationship with God, in this like fully seeing peace and shalom come into the world. So I appreciate hearing that response from you.
Yeah.
So with that, we will come to an end here. So thank you, Andrea, for joining us here on the podcast. I appreciated this conversation. It's good to hear what the church that I'm attending is doing, but it's also good to hear just in general how people are actively, practically working for justice.
Well, I really appreciate having the conversation with you too, Eric.
Thank you for listening to the Biblical Justice Resources Podcast. This podcast is hosted, produced, and edited by Eric Beck. To learn more about how you can be resourced for the pursuit of biblical justice, visit our website at biblicaljusticeresources.com.